I need to tell you about Claire, because her story is one I've carried with me for over a decade now. And I think about it every time someone tells me they found the one while standing next to someone else they once called by that same name. She came to my office on a Thursday afternoon in autumn. I remember because the leaves outside my window were that particular shade of gold that makes everything look like it's already a memory. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and said something I'd heard variations of 100 times before. I did something terrible, and now I have to live with it forever. But what Claire told me that day, and over the months that followed, wasn't just another story about betrayal. It was a story about how we convince ourselves we're choosing love when we're really just running from ourselves. Before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. Think about a moment in your life when you were absolutely certain you're making the right choice, and later realized you've been lying to yourself the entire time. Can you remember that feeling? That strange mix of conviction and terror? Leave a comment if you've ever felt that. I think you'll understand why Claire's story matters. Claire had been married to Tom for 16 years when she realized she'd stopped seeing him. Not in the way people mean when they talk about growing apart. This was different. She told me she could walk past him in their kitchen and genuinely forget he was there. His voice had become background noise, like the hum of the refrigerator or the sound of traffic outside their window. I thought that was just marriage, she said to me. I thought everyone felt this way after enough time. She was 42 years old. Tom was 45. They had 2 children, a daughter in high school and a son in middle school. They lived in a house with a mortgage they were actually managing to pay down. Tom worked in commercial real estate. Claire was a nurse at the county hospital. On paper, they were fine. More than fine. They were stable. But Claire had started to feel like she was disappearing. Not dramatically. There were no breakdowns, no midnight crying sessions. Just this slow erosion, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. She couldn't remember the last time Tom had asked her a question about herself that wasn't logistical. When was the parent-teacher conference? Did she pick up his prescription? Had she called the plumber? And then there was Marcus. Marcus had been Tom's best friend since college. He'd been at their wedding. He was the godfather to their son. He came over for Sunday dinners and helped Tom install their deck and borrowed tools from their garage that he sometimes forgot to return. He was family in the way that friends become family when enough years pass and enough life gets shared. Marcus was divorced. Had been for 3 years. Claire had watched it happen. Watched the sadness settle into him. Watched him learn how to cook for one. Watched him become someone who showed up early to things because going home to an empty apartment felt worse than being the first person of the party. She told me it started with a conversation. It was a Saturday evening in spring. Tom had fallen asleep on the couch watching basketball, and Claire was in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner. Marcus had stayed late, which wasn't unusual. He came around to help her with the dishes. Also not unusual. But then he asked her something. Are you happy, Claire? Not how are you? Or are you doing okay? Those questions have automatic answers. But are you happy? That question has teeth. That question demands you stop and actually look at your life. She told me she froze with a plate in her hands, soap suds dripping onto the counter, because the truth came up so fast and so clear that she couldn't push it back down. No, she said. I'm not. Marcus nodded, like he'd suspected as much, like he'd been watching her fade too. And then he said something that would replay in her mind for years. You deserve to feel alive, Claire. You know that, right? She didn't answer. She just stood there, and the kitchen felt smaller suddenly and warmer, and she became aware of how close they were standing, how long it had been since anyone had looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. Have you ever had a moment like that, where someone acknowledges something you've been denying for so long that hearing it out loud feels like a wound and a relief at the same time? Tell me in the comments, because I think that moment is where Claire's story really begins. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't even touch, but something shifted. A door that had been locked for years suddenly had a crack of light showing underneath it. Over the next few months, Claire and Marcus started texting. Nothing inappropriate at first, just checking in, sharing jokes, the kind of casual connection that feels harmless because it lives in the space between things. But Claire started looking forward to her phone, lighting up, started composing responses in her head before she even got the message, started feeling something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten what to call it. Desire, Not just physical, though that was there too, but the desire to be known, to matter, to exist in someone's mind as more than a list of responsibilities. Tom didn't notice. Or, if he did, he didn't say anything. He was busy with a big project at work, stressed about commission numbers, spending more evenings at the office or on his laptop at the dining room table. Claire told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. They were just friends. Marcus was lonely. She was being kind. But she knew. Somewhere underneath all the rationalizations, she knew. The first time they kissed was in Marcus's car outside a coffee shop. They'd met for lunch on Claire's day off. Told themselves it was just two friends catching up. But when he walked her back to the parking lot and the conversation ran out, there was this silence. This heavy, loaded silence where both of them knew what was about to happen and neither of them stopped it. His mouth tasted like coffee and regret and something she'd been starving for without knowing it. When they pulled apart, Claire's first thought wasn't guilt. It was, I'm still here. I still exist. She went home that afternoon and made dinner for her family. She helped her son with his math homework. She sat on the couch next to Tom while he watched television. And she felt like she was living in two different worlds at once. The one where she was a wife and mother and responsible adult, and the one where she was a woman who just kissed her husband's best friend in a parking lot and wanted to do it again. For weeks, she lived in both worlds. The affair, because that's what it was, even if they were careful, even if they kept telling themselves it would stay small, gave her something to hold on to, made her marriage bearable because she had an escape, made her feel guilty and alive and terrified all at once. But here's what I learned from Claire, and what I've seen in so many other stories like hers. When you're lying to yourself, your body knows before your mind does. She started having trouble sleeping, started getting headaches that wouldn't go away, started snapping at her kids over nothing, and then feeling like a monster afterward. One night, Tom asked her if something was wrong. They were getting ready for bed, and he'd finally noticed, that she seemed distant. I'm fine, she said, just tired. And he believed her, because people believe what's easiest, because looking closer would mean having to deal with what you find. But Claire wasn't fine. She was falling apart. And the worst part, the part she would tell me months later with tears streaming down her face, was that she didn't know how to stop, didn't know how to go back to being the person she was before Marcus looked at her like she mattered. So she made a choice, the kind of choice that feels inevitable when you're standing in the middle of it, even though, from the outside, it looks like madness. She told Tom she wanted a divorce. I need you to understand something about the moment someone blows up their life. It almost never feels like destruction at the time. It feels like freedom. Claire told Tom on a Sunday morning in July. The kids were at her mother's house for the weekend. She'd planned it that way. Needed the space, needed the time. Needed to not have small faces watching her dismantle their world. She said the words in their bedroom, early before coffee, before the day had really started. I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce. Tom stared at her. For a long moment he just stared, like she'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. Then he asked why, asked if there was someone else. And here's where Claire did something that she would regret for the rest of her life. She told the truth. She told him about Marcus. Told him everything. The texts, the meetings, the kiss in the parking lot that had turned into more kisses, into afternoons in Marcus's apartment when she was supposed to be running errands. She told him because some part of her believed honesty would make it hurt less, would make it clean. But there's no clean way to tell your husband you've been sleeping with his best friend. Tom didn't yell. That's what Claire remembered most. He didn't scream or throw things or call her names. He just went very quiet, very still, like something inside him had simply shut down. He moved out that same day, packed a bag, got in his car, and left. Didn't say where he was going. Claire called Marcus, crying, asking what she should do. And Marcus drove over and held her while she fell apart. We can make this work, Marcus told her. I know it's awful right now, but we can make this work. And Claire wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. Because if this wasn't love, if this wasn't worth what she'd just destroyed, then what was it? For a few weeks, it felt like maybe it could work. Marcus was attentive in ways Tom had stopped being years ago. He listened when she talked. He asked questions. He made her feel like the center of his world instead of an afterthought. Claire told herself this was what she'd been missing. This was what she deserved. But then reality started seeping in. The kids found out not because Claire told them, but because their father stopped showing up, stopped calling, stopped existing in their lives in any meaningful way. Her daughter stopped speaking to her, wouldn't look at her, wouldn't eat dinner with her, spent every possible moment at friends' houses or locked in her room. Her son got quieter and quieter until he barely seemed to be there at all. Claire's mother stopped calling. Her sister sent a single text. How could you? Friends chose sides, and most of them chose Tom's. Because that's what happens when you're the one who had the affair. You become the villain in a story everyone else gets to tell. And Tom just vanished. He stayed with his brother across town, saw the kids every other weekend in uncomfortable, silent visits, and refused to speak to Claire about anything that wasn't strictly related to logistics. She destroyed him, and now she had to watch the absence where he used to be. But she still had Marcus. That's what she told herself. She still had the person she'd risked everything for. Except Marcus was changing too. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. He was pulling back. Not physically. He was still there, still sleeping over a few nights a week, still talking about a future together. But emotionally, something had shifted. One night, lying in bed next to her, he said something that made her blood go cold. I keep thinking about Tom, Marcus said. About what we did to him. Claire turned to look at him in the dark. We fell in love. That's what happened. Did we? Marcus asked, and he didn't sound angry or accusing. He just sounded tired. Or did we just, I don't know, use each other to feel less lonely? Claire didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because somewhere deep down, she'd been wondering the same thing. Have you ever gotten the thing you thought you wanted, only to realize you only wanted it because you couldn't have it? Drop a comment if you understand what I'm talking about. Because that's where Claire found herself, standing in the wreckage of her life, holding on to something that was already slipping through her fingers. Marcus broke up with her 3 months after she left Tom. He did it gently, apologetically, but he did it. Said he needed space. Said he wasn't ready for something this serious. Said he thought maybe they'd made a mistake. Claire sat in her half-empty house. Tom had taken a share of the furniture. The marriage carved up and divided like any other asset, and felt the full weight of what she'd done. She'd left her husband for his best friend, and now she had neither of them. Tom wouldn't speak to her. Marcus had walked away. Her children looked at her like she was a stranger. She went to work, came home, sat in silence, started drinking wine in the evenings, then drinking more than she should, then calling Marcus late at night and leaving rambling messages that he didn't return. That's when she called me, made the appointment, came to my office with leaves falling outside the window and said, I did something terrible, and now I have to live with it forever. We spent months together, Claire and I, unpacking what had happened, not just the affair, but what came before it, the slow death of her marriage, the way she'd stopped seeing herself as a person and started seeing herself as only a function, wife, mother, nurse, but never just Claire. I told her something that I'll tell you now because I think it matters. When we feel invisible in our own lives, we'll do almost anything to feel seen again, even if it means destroying everything we've built. Claire hadn't fallen in love with Marcus. She'd fallen in love with the version of herself that existed in his eyes, the woman who was desirable and interesting and alive. But that woman was a mirage, because you can't build a real relationship on top of someone else's wreckage. And here's the psychological truth that Claire had to face. The human brain is very, very good at rationalization. We tell ourselves stories about why we do things, and we believe those stories completely. Claire had told herself she was choosing love, but what she was really choosing was escape. Escape from discomfort, from boredom, from the hard work of fixing something that was broken, but maybe not beyond repair. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance. When your actions don't match your values, your brain has to resolve that conflict. And usually it does it by changing your values to match your actions. Claire had convinced herself that the affair was justified because her marriage was dead. But her marriage was only as dead as she let it become. I'm not saying Tom was blameless. Marriages don't die from one side only. He'd stopped paying attention, stopped being present, stopped choosing her every day the way a partner needs to. But she'd stopped too. They'd both stopped. And instead of fighting for it, instead of having the hard conversations, Instead of sitting in the discomfort and doing the work, she'd chosen the easy exit. The affair that felt like love but was really just adrenaline and novelty and the desperate need to matter to someone. Now she was paying a price. 5 years after that first session in my office, Claire came back to see me, not as a client this time, just to talk, to tell me what had happened since. She looked different. Older, yes, but also more solid somehow. Like she'd found her feet again after years of stumbling. Her divorce had been finalized. Tom had eventually started speaking to her again, but only barely, only about the kids. Her daughter had come around eventually. It took years and therapy and probably more forgiveness than Claire deserved. But they had a relationship now. Fragile but real. Her son was doing okay, seeing a counselor, working through his own feelings about what had happened. Marcus had moved to another state. They hadn't spoken in over 4 years. Claire had stopped drinking, started going to therapy regularly, joined a support group for people navigating divorce and co-parenting, started painting again, something she'd loved in her 20s and completely abandoned when she got married. I did the worst thing I've ever done, she told me, and I had to learn how to live with that, how to be the person who did that and still somehow be okay. She told me about the nights she'd lie awake, replaying every choice, every moment, wondering how she could have been so stupid. The shame that would hit her out of nowhere, in the grocery store, at work, picking up her kids from school. This crushing, suffocating shame that made her want to disappear. But she'd learned something it took years to understand. She learned that you can't undo the past. You can apologize, you can try to make amends, you can work to be better, but you can't go back and unknow what you know now. You can't unfeel what you felt. You can't unkiss someone, unspeak words, unchoose choices. All you can do is live for it. Claire told me she finally stopped asking herself, why did I do that? And started asking, what do I do now? And that shift from paralysis to action, from shame to responsibility, that's where healing began. She'd started being honest, not brutally, not performatively, but genuinely, with her kids about what happened and why in age-appropriate ways, with herself about the person she'd been and the person she was trying to become. She'd stopped making excuses and started making choices. She'd learned to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. When she felt lonely, she called a friend instead of a man. When she felt invisible, she worked on seeing herself instead of looking for someone else to do it. When her marriage to Tom entered her mind, all the years they'd had, all the potential they'd wasted, she let herself feel the grief without letting it consume her. Because here's what I've learned from decades of listening to stories like Claire's. We're all capable of terrible things when we're desperate enough, when we're in enough pain, when we've convinced ourselves that our suffering justifies our choices. But we're also capable of extraordinary things when we decide to face what we've done. Claire told me something in that final conversation that I've thought about often since. She said, I spent so long thinking I destroyed my life, but maybe I just destroyed a life that wasn't really mine anymore. Maybe I had to burn it down to figure out who I actually was underneath all the roles I was playing. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if destruction is ever necessary for growth, or if that's just a story we tell ourselves to make sense of our mistakes. But I know Claire believes it, and I know she's built something new from the ashes, something imperfect and hard-earned and real. So what can we learn from Claire's story? What can you take from this, wherever you are in your own life, whatever choices you're facing? First, if you feel invisible in your relationship, say something. Before you look outside for validation, try looking inside at yourself, at your partner, at the patterns you've both fallen into. The hard conversations are terrible. They're uncomfortable and painful, and sometimes they end in endings anyway. But they're honest, and honest pain is always better than dishonest escape. Second, understand that the person who makes you feel alive isn't necessarily the person you should build a life with. Chemistry and compatibility are not the same thing. Desire and love are not the same thing. The affair feels electric because it's secret and forbidden and new. But that electricity doesn't last. And when it fades, you're left with the same work you were avoiding before, only now you've hurt people who trusted you. Third, if you've already done the thing you regret, if you're the person who made the terrible choice, who betrayed someone, who destroyed something you should have protected, know this. You are not defined by your worst moment. You're defined by what you do after. Claire didn't get redemption. She didn't get the happy ending where Tom forgave her and they got back together, or where Marcus came back and they made it work. She just got the next day, and the day after that, and the slow, grinding work of becoming someone she could live with. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not that we can fix everything. Not that love conquers all. But that we can survive our mistakes. We can learn from them. We can carry them without letting them carry us. I think about Claire when I see people standing at similar crossroads. When I hear the same rationalizations, the same certainty that this time it's different. This time it's real love. And I want to grab them and say, wait, stop. Think about what you're about to do. Think about what you're really running from. But people have to learn their own lessons, have to make their own mistakes. All I can do is tell you the stories I've heard and hope that maybe, somewhere in them, you find something that helps you make better choices than the ones that brought people to my office in the first place. So tell me, have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between what felt right and what you knew was right? Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after making a choice you regretted? Where are you watching from? And what's your story? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. Because these stories, yours, mine, Claire's, they matter. They're how we teach each other to be human. And being human means making mistakes. It also means figuring out how to live with them.